All right, so this is part two of B&B Q&A number 3, 15th of April 2021. We're now about 2:15, and we're gonna wrap up. We're not going to not particularly long session, but what we want to talk about now is we had questions from our wonderful our wonderful patron Kevin. Kevin has written the following. I'll read it out. Tell us about dealing with procrastination, and do you ever feel a twinge of imposter syndrome, or are you confident in your abilities? I'll tackle that first. Tell about procrastination. Well, of course, like any creative role, there are points where I get stuck, points where both of us get stuck. And so I would say the one benefit we have over one-man bands is that we're two of us. So if one of us gets stuck, we can always fire it off of the other. And in fact, I've done that. I've done that a couple of times this year. I said, I can't quite figure out what's happening here. Can you just give me a second? Because like anything else, a second set of ears is always going to add it's going to give you a different opinion on.
We did it this last week actually on this pitch that we're doing, and it does work well because sometimes, as you just said, another pair of ears in a different perspective just allows you to see it in a different way.
When you have deadlines, we don't have the luxury of procrastinating. It's actually more something if there isn't a clear deadline. It's amazing how much a deadline can make you focus. Now, of course, there is nothing to say that you might not end up producing the greatest material you ever do if you're having to do it on a time frame. But it does at least force your hand and say, I'm going to play. I've got to put something down now. I can't play that. And I mean, there've been times where I've literally spent a whole day just sitting in front of a keyboard. I end up putting down nothing. I put down like maybe a couple of notes because I'm like, I'm not happy with. Actually, Bob and I have a very different take on this. I think the way I write is I'm much more into, I'll play and let something organically develop. That's much more of my. It's something. Something I'm like, oh, okay, I quite like that. That's one of the beauties of all effects of all of these sequences now is they are effectively, if you hit play, they're always recording. So if you happen to just come across something you think, oh, I quite like that, and you just hit retrospective record, and it will just show you. It'll put down on the timeline what you just played. Whereas sometimes you might, because amount of times I don't actually remember why did I do that? I can't remember. It's just something it just happened at that moment, and I can't even remember what I did. So that really helped. Well, I think Bob, you're much more into like you'll put something down and you'll work on it you'll program it effectively much, but you'll move everything around there. And I would say there are benefits to both ways of doing this. For me, I prefer I think it feels more organic to do that. But your way, you're actually seeing a lot more of the bigger picture. You can actually make it a much more complicated, detailed arrangement, which you might not be able to play.
You might conceive something that you wouldn't necessarily conceive if you had to play it organically. You might actually look at sometimes I look at the MIDI sequence, a melody or something like that. So what if it did that? Or what if it just the shape of it? What I want it to follow a certain shape, and maybe I wouldn't necessarily make it do that if I'm playing it on the keyboard. So I like both approaches. I can't say I exclusively only do one or the other, as I'm sure you don't. But I do tend to gravitate towards the idea of using the software to program it so I can hear it. And I want to get it in quickly. I want to program it in quickly so I can hear it and see how it sounds.
I think in terms of how we deal with procrastination is, I suppose like anything else, if we're really, really stuck, we'll all talk to each other, we'll listen to references and everything else, and we'll use the standard tropes. Another thing as well, actually a lot of it is just walking away from it. That's another thing I found is a particularly useful way of doing this is you can get so caught up with something. You literally just need to turn off, switch off, and go do something else. Whether go for a walk, have something to eat, have a coffee, whatever. Do something which is not sitting in front of here. That's another thing as well. As I can get so caught up doing this, and you just can't see the wood for the trees.
It's probably the biggest tip of all actually out of all of this, because the more we do that, I mean, for example, I'm not the best mixer in the world, not at all, but what I've learned to do is to create a basic mix and then listen to it on my phone, listen to it in the car, listen to it on headphones, listen to it in all sorts of different places, and with lots of breaks in between, because only after a break do you give your ears a rest, and then you come back and hear something again for the first time after a while. That very first one or two listens through that you have is your opportunity to be completely objective about what's there. You know, you're not invested in it emotionally. You're not sort of you're not caught up in the minutiae of it. And that's a very key moment. That's where you want to make all your notes and trust your ears in that moment, because third, fourth, fifth, sixth listening, your ears start to get fatigued again, and you lose that. So I think it's a brilliant tip, and that's something that everyone
definitely walk away from it. Ear breaks. A lot of engineers we know were big smokers, because basically they were just going up a fag every 15, 20 minutes just to clear their ears. And it's fabulous. It makes a huge difference because they come back and you're more objective.
We didn't deal with the imposter syndrome bit.
Well, that's what I'm trying to say.
Oh,
Do you ever feel a twinge of imposter syndrome, or are you confident in your own abilities? Well, of course, I'd say it's impossible not to, especially if the brief you've been given has been to effectively do your own take on X composer or X track. Then half of you sitting there thinking, especially, I mean, in fact, some cases we've had the problem where the client we're working with has spent so long listening to watching their video with this piece of music, which is by the artist or the composer they want us to effectively do our own take of. They've married the two so closely. You could do anything and they wouldn't be as good, because in their mind they've spent however long and they've married those two together. So it's actually quite difficult. So I remember coming up a few times where we were sitting there and said, I can't make it closer. It's going to be suitable. If I'll make it closer, it's going to get close. And they have to, and it's there. And in fact, many it's that, because they don't realise, because music is such a strong emotional impact, and such a resonance with us that they don't realise that they're doing it. So I suppose from that perspective, yeah, you can feel into imposter syndrome if you're aping someone and you're worried that there's too much of them and not enough of you. Now, over time, I've always found that actually I always want to add some of us. It's funny because in the last week I've had another barrage of YouTube comments on the medieval stuff on which we are, and I was happy as Larry to, when people ask me about medieval, whatever, I always say Danny Elfman was our reference, because the visual reference for the film was Nightmare Before Christmas. It made sense that the music reference for the film was the music from that film. And Tim Burton has worked with Danny Elfman on pretty much all of his films. So, and he has such a unique, wonderful sound, which is very him. Like, I recognise his style pretty much anywhere. That it became something which we were happy to come on. But the wonderful thing about it actually is people reading comments saying, actually, you have done this. Some people will say it sounds a bit Elfman, right? Some will say, actually, it's definitely you. One person said, you've given Danny Elfman a run for the money this week. I was like, oh, I'll take that. I don't believe it, but I'll take it. So it is, because ultimately there is that instance that as composers, as any creative art, you need to put your own stamp on it. It needs to be something from you, and that's where it becomes an interesting challenge, because if they want to hear something which is X composer, be it Elfman or Zimmer or Williams or whatever, they're going to expect that. But ultimately, you really want to give it your own stamp, and it's pushing them in that direction. And I suppose like anything else, it's once they feel confident in your ability to do this, which normally takes a bit of time, especially if they don't know it you before, then it's a case of, I can now feel a little bit more relaxed. I can now do more of me and less of them. And you can actually move it towards that. And it's on some projects, Medieval 2 being an example, we actually went back and redid some of the tracks at the end of the project, because we'd got better at doing this and felt more confident in our own ability. And therefore we would actually start adding some more tracks, as Medieval 1 and Medieval 2 we did that day. So it does totally depend on the brief that you're given. But I suppose the truth is, I don't really feel imposter syndrome. I do feel it's more of a case of it's more of a case of, I'm worried that what you've asked me to ape or copy, I'm getting too close to, and I need to breathe. I need to do my own thing on it. So I suppose that's probably a more accurate answer, I think.
I think from my side, it has to be a bit of both, because if you're you know, you need to stay humble in whatever you do, and not become incredibly arrogant, because that's very difficult to work with. And I think, you know, I think we both stayed humble over the years. And of course, it's impossible to not feel imposter syndrome when it's a big collaborative project where orchestras are involved, you know, extra musicians and overdubs and so on, and everybody's working on your stuff. And our music is at the center of all of this. And, you know, of course, you kind of sit there and pinch yourself, because each stage, every time somebody tracks something for us, it just gets better. And you know, they're realizing our creative vision, and it is humbling. It's a very humbling experience, and it's amazing. It's amazing because at the end of it, it's our names that go on as the composers, and you do feel a little bit, you know, imposter syndrome at that point. But you know, of course, at the same time, you have to have confidence in your abilities. You have to feel sure that you can satisfy briefs, that you have the skills required in order to win pitches and do jobs. Because if you don't show and exude confidence in what you do, then, you know, potential clients can pick up on that. So I think, you know, probably a healthy situation is to have a little bit of both, in my view.
Are there anyone you want to inspire to collaborate with? I suppose truth is, I love working with players. I love working in terms of composers. Of course, I've never even considered working with other composers. It'd be lovely to actually work with that, to work with, especially some of the high-end film guys. It'd be brilliant. But yeah, generally it's us. We're as the composers. So most of our collaborations are with musicians that we've worked with, and of course it'd be great to work with some amazing soloists out there. But I don't have any particular desire to work. Then actually, I think it's more the fact that we're very lucky that we've got to know a lot of great players over the years. And actually, I just look forward to working with those guys again. And like Louis Thorne, who's been our guitarist and bass player since 2004, and I was working with him, spoke to him today, and he's working with us again. So I always love what the people we work with bring to the table for us, because that's for me is that's the satisfaction. Is we give them an idea, and then they'll run with it and they'll take it. And like any other collaboration, long forming collaboration, over the years we've developed a shorthand. We don't even sometimes we just here's our track, make it better. That's pretty much the size of it. And he knows roughly, obviously within the context of the brief, what they need to be doing. So he's actually spent the morning recording stuff for us, and I haven't heard any of it, but I'm pretty sure when he put it in this afternoon, it will sound great, because we've spent so many years. He's got an idea what we want, and vice versa. And in fact, I will go even further with him and say that he's got quite a wide ranging musical tastes, but one of the things he got into a few years ago was gypsy jazz, and as a result of that, he started talking to us about how, and I remember him playing it to us, and I was like, I really like this. I've never written anything in that style before. I don't know it, but it turns out it's a really good, fun thing to do. And it's actually really, and it can create such a unique, wonderful sound. So I would say his influence, as there have been, I think 3 or 4, maybe 5 tracks we've written now, have been totally as a result of his influence on us with gypsy jazz. Because I think it's a brilliant song of music, and it has so much life and character to something. Yeah, so those are the collaborations I really enjoy, because whoever we're working with, they'll bring something to the table. We're working with world musicians, exactly the same thing. We can't, they're thinking, and some, especially the Chinese players that we work with, their brains operating in a slightly very different world than ours in some cases, and that they will come up with ideas which I'd never even dreamed of.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's an inspired answer. I think yes, the musicians, that definitely inspire us, and take our music onto the next level, because they don't just recreate what we've asked them to do, but sometimes some additional lines or additional ideas that just give us another perspective on what the track is. I have to say, just as one last thing, of course, it would be a wonderful opportunity to collaborate with the top Hollywood guys, as you've suggested, people like Zimmer, Elfman. Actually, Thomas Newman I've long since admired the music of Thomas Newman, so that would be amazing. Bit of a pipe dream, but it would be wonderful to work with guys like that.
Okay, so we move on to the so our final question to wrap up today is that actually we think this is a question from our last session which Kevin answered, which we didn't think answered. So we thought we'd be good, and we'll actually answer this question for him on this session. I thought that's really answer. The most difficult aspect for me, right to choose, is getting the arrangement right. So many times I fall foul over working the instruments and having them clash. This loses focus on the concept and it's hard to recover from. What are your rules to keep the beast tamed? It's just about tone and frequencies or deep understanding of the instrument's conversation. How do you decide what instruments to take which part? I would do take advice from their experience. Well, it's one of those things actually it'd be better to answer with a maybe we can answer in more detail in our next video. But there's the kind of thing which we would actually need to talk about in a context with an example. But I think, well, the simplest thing I learned with arrangement is less is more. That's the classic cliched response, but it is actually incredibly true. When we first started writing, especially some EDM, some electronic music, there was a game called Beast Wars in the late 90s. And I happened to be friends with a guy who was actually one of the guys. There's an electronic duo called the Next Men. Brilliant. They do amazing stuff. And he came in and I played it to him. And it was just so much going on. And I mean, you could see there was layers and layers and layers of different lines, like electronica and rhythms and percussion and everything else. And he just said, it's just too much. He said he liked it, but it's just way too much. And he showed me one of his tracks, because at the time he was working on an Akai MPC, which was effectively similar to samples we had, but with drum pads, and actually it was more like a groove-based machine. And I think it only had 8 channels. And his stuff sounded better, much better, largely because that was his genre, and he spent all that time making his amazing sounds himself. But because there was a clarity to his stuff which I didn't have. And the clarity is because it's so easy to overcompensate. It's so easy to sit there and think, it's not quite working. What can I add to make it work? Well, actually, reality is what you should be thinking is, it's not working. What can I take away to make this work? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we ever had, is that certain types of projects, they expect things to be layered and layered, which is sometimes is good. And in fact, you can see some of the high-end film stuff. They've got so much going on, but effectively the core musical ideas haven't really changed. They've got a theme running on the brass, and they've got some electronic in the background. And electronic is a bit layered, and there's a little bit of stuff on top, but everything fits in its own slot. I watched a Junkie XL video recently and he showed me his Batman theme from Justice League, and he had some processed strings, and it just sounds like an alarm going off. It doesn't sound anything like a string line, but the way it had it coming in is that you hear the main thing, and then it's a little bit of strings coming in the background. So it was done in a very, very different way. And I think one of the reasons why he's very successful as a composer is because he had this EDM background. So he would do things which a conventional acoustic composer might not think of doing, and in terms of taking an acoustic line and processing it as sound incredibly electronic, but actually in a way, but the way which it effectively this allowed it to sit in its own space. Because when you hear the strings on its own, it sounds like a normal string line, but when you go through all the processing and everything else you've done on it, he just adds a little bit of a layer of stuff over it, which adds something distinctive. So it's all about creative laying, of course, but done in a way which doesn't get in the way with each other. It doesn't get in each other's way. It doesn't cost. You talked about a loses focus. Well, the truth is, if it's something losing focus on the concept, then the concept itself may be something you need to work on. If that would be I suppose that's the question. If I'm getting stuck on something, I could just batter my way in it for hours and hours, but actually, I might need to delete it and start again. I might need to start writing another section, because if it's not working, there's no amount of layering on top would make it work. And I think that's a lesson which took me a long time to learn, because I'm like an else. I'm happy with a line. Let's make this work. But sometimes it's a case of it's a square peg in a round hole here, and I'm just sitting there trying to make something fit in with this track, which actually it doesn't really work. I am to like it, so I'm spending all my time doing this. But reality is, it doesn't actually really work. So it's a bit again, having an ear break, coming back again. Yeah, it's having, I suppose it's having the not being afraid to getting rid of something, not being afraid to delete something completely.
Let me add something to that, because I was just, as you were talking, I just thought about something I've been doing this week. We've been working on some tracks. It's a pitch for a game. We're not allowed to name check it or anything at this time. But to answer your question, Kevin, about that, we are working on a pitch at the moment for another game. So we'll keep you posted if anything happens there. But the tracks that we're working on this week, they're kind of a modern production, a modern rock production style. So think of more current U2 stuff, think of Coldplay, that sort of thing. But what I've noticed with that music is sometimes where you feel a real drop happens in the music. If you actually sit and listen to the various individual elements that they add for the drop to happen, it's sometimes quite surprising what comes in. You know, you'd think for it to have a dramatic impact, it might have to be something very impactful, like an overdriven guitar or whatever. But actually, no, it's an acoustic guitar. There just wasn't any in the previous section, and now they've added an acoustic guitar. You'd think the drums would be very heavy and full on. No, it's not. Actually, now they've just added the kick drum to a hi-hat. And you'd think it wouldn't have such a dramatic impact at that moment, and yet it does. And so trying to work out what it is that makes that work so well, and is it production, is it composition, or is it a combination of both? And the truth is, it probably is a combination of both. So what I've learned over the years is that sometimes I'll write a line very early on which I really like, and actually everything else then gets built around that. It might be a cool bass line or something that I really like. It might be a rhythm on a kick drum or a tom beat or something like that. And it really works, and it inspires you, and you create all the other things, and the guitar lines start coming off that. But by the end, you mute that line out and everything else sounds clearer and you hear it. So you shouldn't get too married to anything that goes into the track. Don't be afraid to mute something out. I had a keyboard part this week, which I'd written for something. And when everything dropped, I had that feeling that there was just too much going on, and there was too much. It was confusing. There was, it needed stripping out. So I just started going through, just muting a few lines here and there. And I couldn't really tell that they were gone, and that is a sure sign that there's too much going on. Because if you don't miss it, it's not necessary. And I think shine a spotlight on the stuff that's really important. When you listen back to the mix and you hear a particular line or a particular pattern which you think is important, shine a spotlight on that by not letting it be crowded out by other things. And so that's really kind of echoing what you said, Barn. But those would be my tips. And that's really the short answer. And I think you're right. I think we could do a whole discussion on arrangements and how that should work.
Yeah, I think, I remember a while back with Michael Price, a wonderful composer, friend of ours, I was talking about that. It's amazing how an orchestral session, you can have a soloist and they'll cut through. You can have like a flute playing a solo line where he or she's on her own, but they're backed by a warm brass sound and maybe the strings playing, but the line cuts through because actually it's written as a solo line. So it's not all about making something with wall of sound. It's about focusing on what in this particular bit of the track. What's my main now? What's the important thing? What's my interest? What am I focusing on? Is it melody line? Is it texture here? And then just try, as you say, just start muting things out, and still and seeing, because Bob rightly put there, you don't notice what things are missing, which is a classic example. I've overwritten it here. And it's and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But it's part of the creative process. It's how we develop something, and what ends up coming at the end of it is fine. It is ultimately the journey you go on. It's like this track, these pictures at the moment. They want us to layer, and my natural instinct is to, when I'm layering something, is to mute something else out, so that I'm not hearing too much of stuff. In fact, so when the next layer comes in, I want that to be noticed, but not, and therefore I'll mute something which I'm currently got playing so that it can be noticed. So it's a natural instinct to actually make sure that there are only a few things playing at any one point. I mean, we can have, you can have incredibly complicated orchestral tracks, but only 4 things are playing at any one point in time. And that's really a funny fact. I think that's how some of the Elfman stuff works really well. Is that he has a few elements going, and they go on a journey through an orchestra, but the actual at any one point in time, there are only a few actual things played at the same time, and the clarity that provides is incredible. And it's because it's so easy just to layer and layer and layer and layer. And I would say actually, funny enough, as a it's something I used to do all the time, but it was the journey as a composer. I had to force myself to unlearn this rule, and that was effectively actually less is more, and therefore don't be afraid to chuck a load of things out. You'll never know, it might even sound better. I think on that wonderful note, maybe we should wrap it up there. I think.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and see you on the next one.
It shall be the second Thursday in May. Cheers.
Cheers.